Bree, yours, mine, and ours together and separate. If you said to a couple here, start with this one, what would you say?
I tend to encourage people to do it together, especially if they want to have a lot of things together. It makes life a lot easier. And I've seen many people who say, we want to do yours, mine, and ours. And they come back and go, that was just too much work. We always say, make your finances simple so your life could be amazing. Welcome to the Childfree Wealth Podcast, hosted by Bree and Dr. J, certified financial planner. Here we discuss life and finances as it relates to being child-free. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please consult your advisor before implementing any ideas heard on this podcast.
Hey, Childfree Wealth listeners, we're going to talk about how do you manage finances as a couple. And by the way, a lot of these topics will also be useful if you're in a group or anything like that. But it's like, you're not single. So how do you do things? And like, what's the best way to do it? And best is going to depend on you, but figuring that out. And part of the reason we're doing this, so I was watching social media, which I really shouldn't do. And because I'm in Tennessee, I often see some Dave Ramsey stuff. And they were on a tirade that if you can share a bed together, you can share your finances together, you need to get married. And like the only answer is to combine them. And I'm like, no, I don't agree. Like that is the general advice. Like either we keep it all separate or, we get married and put it all together. But there are more options than that. And marriage is a choice, not a requirement for all of it. Bree, what do you think? I mean, like, I hate to start with Dave Ramsey, but, it is on top of my mind.
Yeah, that's fair. Just given where you live, and it is out there. And I've heard that saying many times too. And I think I can see where they're coming from in the sense of it tends to be a super religious background and just context there. I don't fully agree with it. That's how I personally do my finances is everything is combined now. But that's because I'm just lazy, honestly.
And we do everything combined too. But, we had done the yours, mine, and ours before and kind of did different structures. And it didn't really help us. And it's a balancing act. Now, when child-free folks ask me, should you get married? My first question is, do you need health insurance? Which sounds really silly, but in the US, that is like the number one benefit of being married is you get to be on somebody else's health insurance. If you want to do it for your own religious purposes, love really, whatever you want to do, you want to get the piece of paper, awesome. If you don't need health insurance and you don't want to do it, you can actually figure out how do you manage finances as a couple. You can combine them, you can not, but you just need to figure out the paperwork. By getting married, there's some default things that happen in the States. And the default things are things like you can list your spouse on your accounts and it'll automatically transfer to them. There's estate laws that talk about how things happen after death. There's also some protections like you can't rat out your spouse in court, or you can choose to do the spousal thing and be like, nope, I'm not ratting them out. I guess you could rat them out if you want, but there's a spousal protection there. There's some.
How did we end up in that situation? First of all,
I was watching like one of those like Suits shows, and it was part of it. So like, there are some things that are default around estate planning that if you don't do, I want you to have some paperwork. Same around buying like a house together. There's some things that happen with titling a house that marriage makes easier. If you're not going to do it, I want you to be setting up some type of document like a partnership agreement for buying a house and other things. So you need to think about the legal stuff. And we'll get to the financial in a second, but people overlook this legal step. Marriage actually does make it simpler, but then you got the divorce problem. Like spinning things out is much harder. If you're in a couple and you're not married, there's a lot less paperwork. What are you laughing at me, Bree? I'm right.
Yes, but like this is, I don't know. If listeners, we do not ever like sketch out an outline for our episodes just because we don't follow them. We just kind of talk. In my mind, this was not the path I was going, not ratting your spouse out in court, the divorce problem, all valid things, but like not the top of my mind.
Right. We'll get to the stuff you want to talk about. Bree wants to talk about how to manage your money and the accounts and like, we'll get to that. But like, there's some bigger picture issues that you have to think about.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think the challenge is people jump to, should I combine, should we combine finances? And I'm like, that's not the right question. The right question is, are we doing things together? Are we planning together? And then we can make accounts that match it. Like, I guess somebody probably will ask me, should we combine checking accounts? And I'm like, well, it depends. Let's go on Bree's list because she'll get mad if I go further down this. The question to me on managing finance as a couple is not about the accounts, but are you doing financial planning together, separate, or some combination? Your planning decision is going to impact how you set up your accounts.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about that, some people will say, oh, we're planning together, but they want to keep their finances separate. And then I go, okay, well, are you okay if they retire before you because they have money to retire, but you don't? And then they'll go, oh, no, that's not okay. That's one of those questions you can ask that really gets people to kind of clarify what that actually means.
Well, and the other one I like to ask is, okay, your partner is disabled for whatever reason, which, by the way, happens to a large percentage of people. I mean, like it's a commonality. If they're disabled, would you support them? And they're like, well, yes, I would. Well, then you're not doing it completely separately, because let's kind of go to the extreme. So we're a couple. We do things completely separately. It's like we're roommates. Now, if I have a roommate and my roommate is disabled, I might take them to the doctor's appointment and, I might help them out, but I'm not paying all their bills for them. I'm telling you that right now. Like, there's a limit where for my spouse, I would do that.
Yep, exactly. Would you do that or not? And I sure as heck wouldn't do that for a roommate.
And I don't mean to make couples so simple, but that is kind of the question of like, are you going to support each other or not? Are we planning together or not? And if you're planning together, it's possible to plan together, but still have your own individual lives. Like there's this misnomer that like, if we do all our finances together, I can't do anything on my own. No, there's ways to do that and still plan together.
Hey, Childfree Wealth listeners, it's Bree. I highly encourage you to schedule a Childfree Wealth checkup. During this time, you're going to get a couple of forms to fill out that include your life and financial plan. We'll review them, and then we're going to have a meeting and go through them with you. We're going to give you some advice and things to work on and talk through things to make your finances simpler so your life can be amazing. You can schedule yours by going to our website, childfreewealth.com, and clicking the Schedule Now button. Absolutely. And when you're doing it together, you can do or if you don't want to like fully do it together, you can do a yours, mine, ours situation where part of it's together and part of it's separate. It makes things a little bit more complicated. Out of all the options, it probably is the most complicated because then you're managing essentially 3 budgets. Each person has their own budget and then you have one together. And while it works, it's just how much work do you want to do? And is that right for you?
Yep. So as a couple, you really have 3 options. The first is we do everything together. The second is we do everything apart. And the third is some combination, yours, mine, and ours. So let's start with I'm doing everything together. Now, when you do everything together, keep in mind your retirement accounts are still going to be separate. In all of these cases, like an IRA is an individual retirement account. You don't combine that with a spouse. That doesn't happen. But we're talking about your day-to-day expenses, your saving goals, all that. If we're doing it together, we're all on the same financial plan. We're all on the same structure. We plan together. We combine our finances together. Now, I don't care if like the bill, the account that the mortgage comes out of or the rent payment comes out of has both your names on it or not. That's almost secondary to the question of are we doing these together? But what I do like when we're doing things together is we have to come together and say, all right, what do we want to do with our money? Like, are we savers? Are we spenders? Are we, using a lot of debt? Are we trying to file? Are we trying to, kind of cut back on work? Are we doing garden the rose? But we have to have that discussion in advance because that's going to determine how we spend and save.
Yeah, and having that conversation probably is going to take a little bit of time. Many couples think that they can go into the conversation, have one conversation be done. That's not true. So just setting those expectations of it's going to take a little bit to have that conversation. And you might change your mind along the way. That's okay. But don't rush to one answer and then get worried if it doesn't stick right away.
Yeah, but it does take communication. And by all of these take communication. And when we talk to a couple, we'll ask them some deep questions like, all right, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do? Where's your life going? And interestingly enough, they're over here asking us questions about checking accounts. And we're like, no. Like 5, 10 years down the road, how are we doing this? And we should have that conversation. Now, when I was talking about you can still keep money for yourself, you can do the couple where everything combined. And then I love putting money aside for what I call pocket money. You can call it an allowance if you prefer. I don't really love that term.
That's such a terrible term.
Yeah, but people do that.
I know. But I'm like, if my wife ever told me, here's your allowance, I'm pretty sure I would be like, okay, and here's your divorce papers.
Well, but if she has her allowance and spends it on her chicken nuggets, it's fine.
Oh, we buy those as a weekly item now.
Yeah. So here's where we're going. All right. I like with couples that are doing everything together to say we each have X amount of money. I don't know. I'm going to pick a number, $200 that we can spend on whatever we want without guilt and without reporting into the other person. Like this is like your freedom money. And some people literally put in their pocket. Some people put it in their separate bank account. Some people put it on like a debit card, whatever else it is. But if I want to save up my money each month and buy one big thing, and my wife wants to spend her money each week on a fruit dress, which by the way, she does, it's fine.
That's so pretty though.
Right. I mean, she's got this fruit dress thing down. I mean, like, she's got this whole thing. And it was funny because she'll listen to the podcast. She's like, do I have a problem with fruit dresses? I'm like, no, you're spending your pocket money. I don't care if it's on fruit dresses. It just makes good fodder for the podcast. Like, but that's perfectly fine. I tend to save up my money. I'll buy something more expensive or whatever else it is. Right now I'm really liking doing experiences. Like I'll go to the boat show. That's expensive to get the good tickets. I won't spend it month to month, but I'll spend it in a big chunk. It doesn't matter. But the intent is you get to do whatever you want with that. But everything else we do together as a couple in this structure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't matter. People will ask like, well, where do I put it if I'm not going to spend it, or what can I do? Like, how do I not feel guilty for spending it, or, getting into arguments? Just make your own definitions of what pocket money is. Another big thing, I envision this issue might be more for like you and your wife than I have the issue, but people will ask about haircuts. Like asking.
Okay, she's making a bald joke there. Okay, for those who can't see, I don't have any hair. Like, breathe.
Also, asking lesbians, which is me, about whether or not haircuts should be personal money. Well, we both have about the same amount of hair. Like, that's going to be very different if you're in a heterosexual couple and you got a bald guy and a long-haired woman. Like, you need to make your own definition of what fits in your personal money.
Yeah, and this is part of that planning. And by the way, when you're getting out of debt, when you're first trying to get your budget set, you do have to be very specific about it. As you get further along, the question is, are you getting to your goals? I'll be frank, my wife and I, we don't track it down to the dollar every month because we're out of debt. We're on our path to our goals. We end up with more money at the end of the month than we started with. It's fine. Now, what I find though, is if you do take the time and lay it out in a budget and have the discussion in advance, it may free you of some of the guilt to spend the money. Where I'm saying, hey, sometimes you just have a general plan. That actually might hurt you a little bit because you're like, well, I mean, if I don't spend as much money, maybe we can get to this goal faster. I'm like, look, an extra $50 for a fruit dress is not going to change how fast we get to our goals.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There comes a point where it's so minimal.
Yep. I will say that with any of the couple structure, I really do like doing a weekly budget meeting. Even if you're not down to the penny on the budget, like, whatever, you're looking at your finances, but a weekly finance. And Bree, I know you have a great structure for that.
I do. My wife and I actually have some blank here. Let me grab a blank one that doesn't have it written on. But we tend to go through these things each week. And on it, we cover our highs and lows for the week, something we're grateful for. We recap an action item from the last week because we each have like an assigned action item we need to do. We give a new one. We check in on our money. And then we ask what we need support from one another with. And at the end, we always wrap it up with, I love you because. Because sometimes the conversations, it can just be a lot and heavy. So having a good reminder can be super helpful.
Yeah, whatever structure works for you. I do encourage a weekly check-in of like where we're going. And by the way, as we shift to this question of like yours, mine, and ours, and some of the harder ones on finance, you need to do more of those. For the, we're doing joint, we need to at least meet weekly. We kind of need to make sure we're on the same page. And then I tend to like, once a month, we're doing kind of the bigger picture stuff. Like, okay, overall for the month, this is where we ended up, and this is how it fits. And, by the way, we got our tax return in, and this is what happened, like, which might not fit in a weekly, but it's the bigger structure.
Just having those conversations, and you can even write down, like I have a note in my phone. We have one big shared list of things, and in there we'll put in like discussion topics we need to cover as well.
Yep. And when we meet with clients, we actually meet with them on a monthly basis in most cases. And we become kind of that big picture person. Like, they have to come back once a month and, kind of work on their homework and kind of get the steps done. Like, for example, hey, have you gotten your estate plan done? It's one of those, like, you don't put on the weekly, but it's on the big picture. Hey, do I get that paperwork, other things? You just need to build a structure around it. So if we go from one extreme, like we're going to combine everything, we'll go to the other extreme and we're going to combine nothing. So this is the roommate structure. In the roommate structure, you are each on your own financial plan. You are each on your own life plan, and that's fine. And what's interesting is when I've worked with couples on this, some people feel like that like makes them like further apart, but it doesn't. It's an independence plan for them where they like having their own thing. And I love seeing couples. There's some great examples where they do a lot of travel kind of together. They do some individually. They do their own things where they're there to support each other. But what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine. And like we might have some joint bills, but we don't really have joint goals. It's like we might split the rent just like a roommate. But in that structure, really the communication is around any of the joint bills and how my plan might negatively impact yours. But frankly, my plan comes first ahead of yours, and that's not wrong.
Yeah, that's true. And having that very clear line of like, this is my plan, we each have our own separate plans is important. I've met with couples before and they'll say, oh, we do this and we do this. And I'll ask like how they're planning. Sometimes it won't be super clear. And then they realize, oh no, we're actually planning separately and we're good with that. And it's kind of fun too, because one day I asked somebody and they said, we like planning separately because then when we come together, in this case, a lot of their things they were doing was they would travel separately and they would come together and they would talk about what their experience was, but they never really traveled together. And I thought that was kind of a fun way to look at it.
Yeah. And actually, from a financial planning standpoint, they're two different clients to me. So if you're going to do separate things, I'm not doing joint meetings because here's what happens. I might give you advice that is good for you and bad for your partner. And I will usually tell people that, like, hey, this is right for you. And that's okay if you're doing things completely separate. It's not like you're trying to undermine the other person, but there are just some things that don't fit both of you.
Yeah. And it works. We've had meetings before where we've never met the spouse. It's only been one person that we've met with the entire time because things were just so completely separate.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those where when people say they're doing things separate, I ask those questions like kind of like disability, other things, retirement. And I ask them why they're separate. And sometimes they're separate because they're just trying to like protect their stuff. Now there's ways to protect your stuff and do things together. And that's kind of where this yours, mine, and ours comes in, where you can have your own goals, but there's also joint goals. And by the way, if you're going to do yours, mine, and ours, actually, I take it back. Any of these, you should have a prenup. But if you're going to have yours, mine, and ours, you really need a prenup. Like we need to have specific documents around this. What you do in a yours, mine, and ours is we might have joint goals. Like, for example, we might want to buy a house. Now, you've heard the podcast. I might not always agree with buying a house as the number one goal, but if that's your goal, great. Or you might have a goal to, travel the world together, whatever it is. We plan together for that goal. Then we also have our own individual goals. And when you do this structure, there's some things you come together for and there's some things you stay apart. It tends to, get you towards doing things as the big picture together. And then the smaller ones are individual.
Absolutely. And if you're putting them bigger things together, It's also important to know exactly how you're going to split it up. If you're doing that big picture, you're aiming to buy a house, well, then a lot of your stuff might be going towards a joint fund, and you might just have a little bit left over on your own for each of you. If you don't really have big things together, you've just got some small things together, then the amount you put towards your joint pot is going to be slightly different. But knowing what those goals are is super helpful. And it's also important to know that you don't have to have the same amount going the entire time. There are people who will create in their prenups and say this specific percentage has to always be going to our joint funds. And there are other people who will say, we'll decide a percentage and agree upon it at different times. But it's important to know what you're actually funding and what buckets they're coming from when you're doing this.
Yeah, and there's kind of two ways to figure out this math on the yours, mine, and ours to make it somewhat fair. And I say somewhat fair because this depends on the couple. So I tend to like where each of the couple gives the same percentage in. And Bree was talking about flat percentage and other things, but like, hey, we figure out we need to cover $1,000 a month in bills. One person makes 2 times the other person. We each give the same percentage in, but the dollars are different. So the result there is you have the same percentage to have fun with or to do your personal goals, but the dollars change. So if somebody is, choosing a job that is paying less, they will have less money for the fun stuff, but they will give the same percentage in. To me, that feels a little bit more fair, but for some folks, that doesn't work. The alternative is we give the same dollar amount in. Well, in the dollar amount structure, what happens is the person who is making more money ends up with a whole lot more money to have fun with. And where this runs into issues, I had a really interesting couple working on this, and they were working on giving the same dollar amount in for trips. But one of them liked traveling a little bit fancier than the other person. And the result was that one of them ended up having to take out debt to go to some of the trips. I'm like, no, we're not doing that. Where the the percentage would have made that work itself out. And I think there's kind of a balancing act between the two. But what I like is to pick one of them, either flat amount or percentage, and run it for 6 months and see how you like that before you make any kind of permanent decisions.
We can also do a different percentage too if one person's making like 80% of the money and the other person's making 20%, and kind of split it out that way and see, the one person is going to contribute 80% towards 80% of the joint bills and the other person's going to contribute 20%. So it's a little bit more equitable. That's also an option as well.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to split this, but the key is to have the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is one of those, yours, mine, and ours is the hardest as far as communication goes.
Absolutely.
Because, it can cause fights if you don't have an answer of how we're doing this. And it's an issue about like, what happens if our goals are kind of misaligned? So if this is particularly an issue with people with 2 different incomes. One of them's like, hey, I'm going to be able to retire 5 years earlier than you.
Yeah.
If that's okay for both, that's fine. But if our joint goal is to retire together, well, that's not going to work.
It causes a little bit of resentment sometimes, and that definitely boils over into conversations so we can see it.
Yep. And now here's the thing. The combining finances together, yours, mine, and ours, or separate, doesn't matter if you are romantic, married, or not. Like you could just be, with your friend, you're sharing expenses. You can pick which one of these is. If you aren't going to be married, we got to do this on legal documents. If you're going to be in a group, like I have a lot of folks want to do in the Golden Girls setup. We can do the same thing. Everything together, everything separate, or the yours, mine, and ours. The one thing I got to caution, if you get more than 2 people in the couple, yours, mine, and ours may end up with like a bunch of plans. Because like I have some together with this friend and some with this plan, and like it can be a little complex, but as long as the communication is right, you're okay. The other part of this is whatever you do, I do recommend documenting it so that if there's ever a split, it gets, we have something there. So let's use the example of buying a house. So we buy a house together. If we set up the partnership agreement, we can determine if we have equal share or something separate. So like Bree was talking about, like one person puts 80% in. Well, do they own 80% of the house?
Yep.
And it's okay either way, but we need to have this on paper. I mean, things happen. What happens if your partner dies and all of a sudden you're owning a house with their family member? And they're like, oh, well, we're going to split it down the middle. And you're like, but I put 80% into it. Like, you have to have this documented.
It's so important to have it down in writing. And I think that it can often be forgotten because we don't necessarily think about those things. And it's not something our minds go to. We just, many times it's like, hey, we're in love. We want to do these things together, especially if you're looking at getting married. And then there's a lot more complications to it that just you need to have in place to protect yourself.
Yep. And part of this is I'm trying to prepare you. So the number one cause of divorce in the United States is infidelity. Number two is money and money fights. And if you look at the data on money and money fights, income disparities between a couple, they just make it worse. As the income disparity goes up, the more likely you're going to have money fights, which does not have to be the case. I tend to recommend, and just kind of go with me if you're there, if you're a couple and you're deciding to be together for a long period of time, I'm not saying getting married, but like you've decided, hey, this is it for us for a while. I recommend working with a financial planner to ask the questions where we can ask the questions you can't ask each other. Like, hey, are you okay with this? And I've had some times where couples will like be mad at me because I asked the question. I'm like, fine, you can both team up against me. I'm good with that. But you need to have that. And if you're going to get married, you have to work with a professional to kind of work these things through because we have the documents. And you can actually set up what's called a no-nup. So even if you're not getting married, here's how we're going to split things up. You can set up prenups if you're going to get married. Like, there's a lot of different things. But the key is having the conversations. And remember, it is nearly impossible to teach your spouse anything. Okay? The rule in financial planning is you can't teach somebody who you've seen naked or they've seen you naked. Well, guess what? That's how that works. And I can say something. I remember the couple last night, and they're like, and I was laughing because she was like, I told you that a week ago. And I'm like, yeah, he didn't hear that. Like, it's just kind of how it works. And that's where, if you're going to do a couple and if you're going to do things that are, working through setting up the structure, working with a planner does help.
Hey, listeners, like what you're hearing? Don't miss a thing. Sign up for the Childfree Wealth newsletter for weekly tips, tools, and podcast updates. Head to childfreewealth.com/newsletter to get on the list. And having solid conversations. When my wife and I did our prenup, we went through and did all of it. When we went to go through, read the revisions, we actually went out for dinner that night and went to this place that had arcade games. So we read through our prenup, made the adjustments we wanted to, noted all of them down to send back to our lawyers. And then we went and we played arcade games because I don't know if you've ever done a prenup before, but sometimes it can be a great prenup. Each person's probably going to be a little bit annoyed with something that's in there.
Yeah, and it's that whole negotiation of like, if you don't each walk away with a table from a little bit upset, you probably didn't negotiate hard enough. And that's part of it. I think the other part, just a reality check, in our current political world, I don't rely on marriage as answering all the answers around the finance, especially, for same-sex marriage. There's some issues around, is that going to be a legal issue in the future? You might want to do a little extra documentation. There's some things we can do, but we want, like, if it sounds like I'm like over documenting, I kind of am, and that's okay.
Yep.
So Bree, yours, mine, and ours together and separate. If you said to a couple here, start with this one, what would you say?
I tend to encourage people to do it together, especially if they want to have a lot of things together. It makes life a lot easier. And I've seen many people who say, we want to do yours, mine, and ours. And they come back and go, that was just too much work. And we always say, make your finances simple so your life can be amazing. Sometimes some of those other things can make things a little bit tricky if it's not together.
Yep. And I'm with you. Normally, I go to the combining. If you have like a big difference in incomes or big difference in like inheritances, sometimes that will lean towards yours, mine, and ours. When people want to do things completely separate, I usually am asking a lot of questions about why. And often it's for fear. Like, they're like, hey, I'm not going to have my money to spend on my fruit dresses. I'm like, no, we can take care of that. So just kind of pull that apart. But the bottom line is it has to work for you, and you have to talk about it in advance, and you have to have documents.
If you enjoyed the show,
please consider leaving a rating or review. We'd love to keep the conversation going. Please let us know your thoughts wherever comments are available or email us at media@childfreewealth.com. To stay up to date, find and follow Childfree Wealth on social media. If you're interested in working with us, learn more by visiting our website, childfreewealth.com. We'll see you next time.